The other part of my day job now is leading for the university on Athena Swan. So I'm the university's director for Athena Swan. That position came about because I prepared for my own institute, which is the Institute of Translational Medicine, with my team, our Athena Swan application. And I got so cross and fed up about how much work it was that I can say I went banging on doors, because one of the things about being in a place long enough is you know more or less which doors to bang on, and said we need to do this better. Hence, I'm now the university's director for Athena Swan. So do be careful what you ask for, as the proverb says. So that's me and why I feel I have some pieces of information that I'm very happy to share with you, but clearly I don't have expertise as working as a professional services member of staff, for example. So if that's me, if we can have the next slide, please, Ruth, then I suppose well, why not me? But I think I use this cartoon just to say, actually, is this the question we're addressing today as well? That in terms of being a female in a university and an academic, why isn't it us? Why aren't there as many women as men represented in the higher echelons of our universities? And what can we do to progress what looks, I think, a little bit like a train line on that cartoon, so that we're no longer asking, why not me? It will be me, it will be us. So if I could have the next slide, please. Oh dear, yes, so I'm not meaning to be dispiriting here. So there we are, progressing our female talent into what? Into a dead end where we don't get any further. That's maybe how it's been. Things are changing. And so what we want is a better, happier career progression. And so we're not going to rest in peace. If I can have the next slide, please, Ruth. In fact, we're going to do just the opposite of that. We're going to have initiatives. We are going to bring about change so that we end up getting our chairs. And that phrase, cradle to chair, is what I coined for our university to discuss the progression of female talent. It's a rather beautiful chair, that one, isn't it? It's a throne, so perhaps that's to remind us that it's not just to chair, but to become VC. I'm not saying our VC has a throne, but it's just to remind us that not only is there academic progression, but there's leadership progression for females into managerial roles, all the way up to being a Vice-Chancellor. And at University of Liverpool, I'm thrilled to say that we do, since 2015, have a female Vice-Chancellor, Professor Janet Beer. So if I could have the next slide, please. So then, what I've structured this presentation around now is the progressing female talent. Why would we want to do that? Why we're interested in it? Then how can we do it? And then finally, what, if anything, are we achieving by this? What initiatives have worked? How can we measure any forms of impact that we might be having? So again, if I could have the next slide, please. And for considering the why part of it, why would we want to do this? I can see two major reasons. They're not necessarily mutually exclusive. One I will call the just and fair argument, the moral imperative, and the second one I'll call the money, the financial aspect of this. So if I could have the next slide, please, Ruth. Thank you. So in universities, if we actually look at the representation that we have at the moment, so the headline figure looks good. Women, well, if you're a woman, perhaps looks good. Women comprised, and this is the latest HEFCE data for 2013, they were the majority of all students? So all's well in the world, or is it? Well, let's drill down. So if I can have the next bit. So in non-set subjects, yes, equality is there, or in fact better than equality in almost all the non-set subjects. Next bullet, please. That top line figure again, equal proportions of female students study in set subjects. And of course, this being a WISE webinar, we're particularly interested in our science, engineering and technology subjects. If I could have the next bullet. Certainly there are more females in some of these areas that are contributing to that equal proportion of females. So in all medicine, veterinary courses, and most biological sciences, there are more females. However, final bullet shows, as we well know, that when we come to some subject areas, there's been and continues to be a deficit of females studying these subjects as students. And that is, of course, why WISE and our universities are very interested in any initiatives that can get female students into these subjects. And as we know, this probably starts at age 7 or 8 and in schools, making sure that girls aren't turned off, don't stop their own opportunities, etc. at an early age. So if I can have the next slide, thank you. So that's the students. What about the staff? So again, that top line figure looks good. Women comprise the majority of staff in our higher educational institutes. However, there's always a however, isn't there? If we look at that segregation, you can see that the majority of staff are in the professional or support staff. Most of those are women. When we go to academic staff, we can see that there are fewer women than men. And if we look further into that, we can see that that figure falls more when we go to set subjects, although not disastrously. And then when we look at what HEFCE calls senior contract levels, there's more or less 3 times as many men occupying those roles as women. And that translates to, in terms of chairs, if I can have the next bullet point, please, that women account for around 22–23% of chairs. So, and the very last point on this is if we then go to the VC level, we're down to a fifth. So a fifth of women, that's all, a fifth of all institutions are headed by women. So not so great for women academics, not so great if we're thinking of how long is this going to take to change things, to bring about equal representation, assuming that that's what we want. To personalise it, this next slide shows data from my own institution where I led that Athena Swan Silver application. And I think it just perfectly shows what the issues are, what the data shows there. And that's what I like about Athena Swan, because it is based on getting the data. So if you look at the orange line that starts upper, so in this area it's an Institute of Translational Medicine, so there's a lot of biomedical scientists there. And you can see we start off with more females than males. By the time we get to lectureship or fellowship, equal, and then the females plummet as the males rise, so that almost like the national average, we have around 20% of female professors in the institute and corresponding 8% male. So we have that classic scissor diagram where there's a crossover, and that's what we want to do something about it, both in our institute and at a personal level. I very much want to do something about this. I believe in the fair and just argument. I realise not everybody necessarily does. So if we can have the next slide, can we come on to the money? And let's face it, the money, does get people often interested. But for this, let's turn to the business world just to see what they're up to. If I can have the next slide. And there's loads and loads of pieces of information one could show here, but I've just taken 2 pieces of data or information there just showing how the business world is certainly keyed into the need for diversity. So that quote there saying it's crucial to fostering innovation in the workplace, and diversity is powerful because of the enormous motivational impact of seeing people make it to the top, irrespective of gender or any other difference. And you'll note so far I have concentrated on gender, and I will do so throughout. Of course, diversity does not just mean having women in the workforce, and we know that ethnic minorities, that word minority says it all, they're very much a minority still in academic positions in the UK, but I'm not going to mention that further. So why are companies interested in this? Because not only do they have happier staff, better staff, but it actually turns out that they perform better. So if you look at those figures there, this survey looked at what the sector averages were and how companies performed relative to those. And you can see here that you do better if you're diverse. Next slide, please. So from that, we can also say that it's almost fashionable, and this is Dolce & Gabbana for those of you who are interested, and just look at that diversity in their advertising. They're not doing that necessarily because they're good guys, but because this is what is good business. Therefore, not surprisingly, of course, our universities are interested in it. If I could have the next slide. And this is from the Equality Challenge unit saying, to remain competitive, etc., you need to be tackling the issues around diversity, and you need to be making cultural and systemic changes. Next slide, please. So with that, next bit, please, I think we can now say we'll move on to the how. Next slide, please, Ruth. How can we make this happen? And so this is where I'll touch on the cradle to chair scheme that I've called it, that we have at the university. The cradle being induction. From the minute you join us, the ability to progress, the ability to ask for training and mentoring is there from the minute you step into your job. And we want you to have this cradle to chair experience and to give you all the help to progress your career, male or female for that matter. And I'm really, really pleased, this is a bit of boastfulness, but this, when we wrote it up for HEFGE, has been chosen as a best practice element, and I've just put in there the link to that. Next slide, please. And so, and yes, so what does this actually mean? What are we doing that's best practice? I think what I'd say right now is that I don't think I'm going to rock your universe with what I'm going to show you now, which I've broken down like that, because throughout the sector we're all learning from each other, we're all sharing, we're all reading each other's Athena Swan applications, for example. Perhaps what we've done though is have a really holistic, joined up approach to this, that leadership, to make sure the bits do talk to each other. So let me just look at how some of this has worked for us in Liverpool. So next slide, please. So it costs money, is something to say. You have to resource both Athena Swan teams, developmental programs for your females, and you have to make sure that you have the programs in place, both internally and knowledge of what's going on in the external environment and what works best for your team. So certainly we do need to develop our women, and these are some examples of how you do that. Our own Vice Chancellor says that it's often said to her, oh, but women don't want leadership. And what she always says is that, you know what, once women have had a taste of leadership, they do like leadership because you have more control. And so let's just get rid of that myth that women don't want to be in leadership positions. Next slide, please. So we have a whole host of activities, workshops, etc. Some of these we do make female only, some of the networks. Again, no apologies for that, because that cohort effect of seeing others similar to you doing what you want to do, sharing experiences, we have found is actually really important for that female voice to be heard. So again, the bullets just show some of the things we've done. Next slide, please. Mentoring. These days, I think everywhere, I hope, has mentoring. Really, just to say that the mentoring can be at many levels. It can be peer-to-peer, of course. It can be within your own institution, as we've done there in our institute. But it can, of course, also be external. One can have one's learning societies, etc., also having mentoring schemes. And it's a question of finding out what works best for you. But I am still sometimes surprised by younger women, earlier career stage women who don't have mentors, who are struggling with issues. And as I say, it's good to talk. So do seriously consider getting a mentor, or indeed mentors if you haven't already. Next slide, please. So, and we also have a mentor lead. So this is recognised, that's Professor Judy Coulson, and within our institute we have that title for this, just to highlight the importance the management of our institute put on this. Next slide, please. So what I'm really proud of at our university is that we do not have a qualifying period for maternity and other forms of parental leave. So you can come to us on day one pregnant. It's not a problem. We will honour all that we can and help you as much as you can, irrespective of where and how. We have a lot of what I would call family-friendly policies, and that includes people who can talk to you who've perhaps recently gone through it themselves or know the facts and figures. HR departments are really important here, and buddy scheme for those who are about to take leave. Next point, please. Return to work packages are very important. There's always a lot of how can I put it, competitiveness around these, and so sometimes you will hear of other places that seem to have more generous packages. Use that information as best you can. We're all working in different financial constraints, but the main thing is that there are people to have discussions with, that you can have an interview about what your aspirations are for when you return, so that there isn't a disjoin between your new working life, having had a period of maternity leave, for example, and what the institution thinks you want if you haven't spoken to each other. Next point, please. And of course, I think like many other institutions, we have obviously well aware of the huge concerns that our untenured workers have. So these are usually the early career researchers, our postdocs, and that's both in terms of letting them have, as they undoubtedly can, all the help for having a return to work after a baby when you're on unsecured funding. And that's a really key issue that comes up time and time again, not just in Liverpool, but throughout the sector. Next, please. And yes, of course, we encourage re-entry after 2, 3, 4, 5 years. To be honest, we've only had 1 or 2 females taking up that option so far, but it's something we're trying to re-energise so that people know here in Liverpool we're very interested in you. Thank you. Next one, please. So part of what we have to do is make sure that we communicate well, and having friendly looking websites is part of that. Having networks is also part of that. So you have to be able to communicate. There's no good in having the best policies in the world and none of your staff know about it. Next slide, please. And you know, we have had some, I would say, innovative things that when staff have to come in for open days, sometimes that's a Saturday morning, we make sure that they can have free childcare. We have on-site childcare provision, and I've put that in capitals because I'm so pleased we actually have a car park that is there for carers, and that doesn't get filled up by 8 AM, and I'm really, really pleased about that. Next slide, please. And again, this really reinforces what I've said about communication. And so this is just one of the workshops we run in our institute. There's all kinds of things you can do, because I think it's not enough to say, right, we've got the policies, we've communicated it, sit back and do nothing. You have to keep giving out the messages. So you have to keep at it, refining it, reinforcing it. Next slide, please. So recruitment, again, this can be a thorny issue of how to get a really good selection of the best men and women applying for your positions. One of the things we would say is you have to think hard about, when you're doing the job specs, what is really actually essential, what criteria you're really needing, and really look at those. What could you provide on the job to a really good candidate who just lacks perhaps some of that experience? And as I've written there, to do away with the traditionally defined male characteristics of academic leadership, because our institutions have changed, and the old way isn't necessarily, that probably isn't the best way. So move with the times. Next slide, please. So many, for senior positions, many universities will now use headhunters. Make sure they're good. Ask them for their evidence that they've been successful in identifying and addressing diversity gaps. What was really good about REF 2014 was how, if you'd had periods of absence, then the number of papers you had to return was reduced. And so that acknowledgement of there are periods in our lives when things change, I think we can also bring into when you're looking at CVs to recruit, and also for promotion. And to take positive action in your recruitment to get the best, rather than just hoping for the best, because that hasn't delivered for us so far. And there, the idea that why not model yourselves on those who have done better. And our Vice-Chancellor points out how well Australia have done, which again you might not necessarily have thought of. Next slide, please. Other things to think about, we're familiar with the 2-tick system for disability. What about that for women and shortlisting them? Next slide, please. Blinded shortlisting. I know there's been a lot of discussions around this. It still remains, I would say, a challenge for an academic position to totally blind the shortlisting panel as to it, but could be worth a try. And again, if you're trying to attract people, I would say also to make use of all the social media and other media that are out there, so that you do look like you're actually knowing how to communicate and talk to the kind of people you might want. Next slide, please. And look out there, there are all sorts of good things going on. So it's not just the University of Liverpool, and that's taken from Nature just a couple of years ago. Institute in Australia again, and there's some really, I would say, cutting-edge ideas in that article, so do take a look if you haven't done so already. Next slide. For promotion, we've done lots of things. I think no one now would say in our university they aren't clear what you need to do for promotion. We have transparent guidance. Like I guess most other places now, we've realised the importance of having panels that are gender balanced. And of course, I say of course, I think it's probably of course for most places, having the mandatory unconscious bias training for all those involved in recruitment, selection and promotion. And then I think what has really, really helped us is our promotion workshops. So if you are interested in promotion, even if it's a couple of years down the line, and you want to know what was it like for somebody who's been successful, then come to the workshops. What's it like? How can you ask questions of the panel informally? We will have someone who sits on one of the panels. What's it like in other areas? You will have other people there who are also wanting to be promoted, and you can form networks and help each other. These, I think, have been really key to building momentum around what we've done. Next slide, please. And then, of course, it has to be tailored and nuanced to local needs. For example, in my own institute, we have clinical academic staff. They are academics for only 50% of the time, so they need special help and consideration. As it says there, we have podcasts from the head of institute explaining what's involved. We have informal promotion committees. You can send your CV and have constructive criticism given to it. And that, I would say, removes quite a bit of the fear factor. Obviously, going in for promotion, you're putting yourself up there. You're not always going to succeed, but more often than not, you will if you've listened and you've involved and engaged with these kinds of activity. Next slide, please. So those are some of the hows we've used. What, if anything, next bit, please. We're on the what bit. What have we achieved? So next slide, please. So we have had impact. I know this is not the whole reason for having Athena Swan Awards, but nevertheless, we now have awards in all our science and engineering faculties. We've just had our first silver one there, and we've also had awards at silver level in 5 out of our 6 biomedical sciences faculty. As a university, I'm delighted to say we have just received our silver university or institutional award under the new criteria, and I'm just so happy about that. From our female VC, who I've mentioned already, Professor Janet Beer, her team is now got more females on it. Next point, please. And yes, if you can believe, surveys, staff satisfaction, confidence, and all that has improved by what we're doing. Next bit, please. This comes back to that slide I showed you of my own institute. So we do all this. Does any of it have an impact? And I'd say, yes, it does. So look now at how we have narrowed the gap. If you turn to where the professors are, the green arrow was that disparity you saw previously. Now the blue arrow shows how we have narrowed that gap by actually a considerable amount. So it is working. Next slide, please. And look at this, University of Liverpool, top of the league table. We are so happy about this. This league table is one drawn up just last month by the Times Higher Educational Supplement, and Liverpool is there at the top for the university that's made the largest improvement in the proportion of female professors. Now you can argue about this all you want about, does it depend where you started from, does it depend on absolute numbers, but there we go, we have made the most. So our promotions policy, because this is largely promotion, not recruitment, has worked. Next slide, please. So we would say that having a critical mass of women at the top is a prerequisite for getting that step change in culture. And then it comes to this relationship between the all the way from the students, early career researchers, lecturers, all the way through. But that critical mass of women at the top, I'd say, is a huge encouragement, and you need that for cultural change. So we're already doing well for female professors, and we have, with the blessing of the VC, the encouragement of the VC, her leadership actually said, you know what, quotas are used in industry now, why don't we have targets at least for us? So 30% by 2020, and the VC also wants it that we have no fewer than 40% of either gender on all our university boards. Next slide, please. So I think you have to keep on keeping on. It doesn't happen overnight. You think you've battened down one hatch and another one rises up. But that's some of the things that we have done. And I'd want to now just thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. That was all very interesting. Thank you very much. We've got a number of questions that I'll start to put to you. I think some of these you did actually answer as you went along, so I'll just put those to you that perhaps you didn't cover. You mentioned a mentoring booklet, and somebody said, could the mentoring booklet be made available to everyone for inspiration? I don't know whether that's got intellectual property rights for the University of Liverpool, or whether it's perhaps something that WISE could share with its members through some of our resources.
Sure, from the top of my head, I can think of absolutely no reason why not. The photos, because we drew that up about 3 or 4 years ago, so we might have aged a bit in the meantime, but I will check and get back to you. Please send me an email. I would love to share it. I would love to share it, yep.
Okay, and if the answer is yes, we'll share that with the slides and the recording on the members area, so thank you for that. There's somebody looking for a mentor that hasn't been able to find one within their own institution. So if anybody would like to offer themselves up as a member, as a mentor, perhaps they could post a note in the chat, and I can connect you both later. Susan, how did you convince university leaders to have no qualifying period for maternity leave? Was there any financial impact?
You know what, the financial impact is not huge, actually, and for the good it does. I think if you just make a logical argument, what is the maximum it's going to cost us? We are not going to have suddenly 100 women come to us pregnant, getting jobs and needing our help. So if you just do the calculation, or just look back at your own records, how many women, because it is generally women here, have you not been able to help because they didn't qualify? And how much better would you feel if you know what you've said, we want you to come to our university, but there's going to be a financial hit for you. Who wants to do that? So just get your data, get your information, and then just in a matter of fact say, this is what we would want to do, surely. And then if that's the sort of just or fair argument, I think then the money argument is, you know what, it doesn't cost a fortune, and we can brag about it. We can maybe actually say, look how good we are, come to us, come to us. So, you can play it both ways, I would say. Yeah.
Thanks, Susan. You mentioned about the 2 ticks method in an earlier slide towards the end, and a few people have asked if you could just clarify what the 2 ticks method is.
Yes, so this actually has to be used when you're recruiting those. The protected characteristic is disability, and that actually, as long as their application is in order, if you will, and that they meet the basic criterion, then they get to be shortlisted. I mean, the statistics for universities, we tend to think of ourselves as good employers, but actually something like only 4 to 5% of our staff are classified as disabled, whereas nationally in the workforce it's something like 12 to 13%. So there's certainly more work to be done there. So in other words, you get a short list that is perhaps made longer by 1 or 2 people because they qualify in terms of they have the criteria. Normally you look beyond, you're trying to almost, at the very word shortlist, you're trying to get rid of people to make it manageable at interview. This, so that's what the 2 ticks scheme is. So the thought is, should we do that in some subject areas, especially in the set subjects for females? Yeah, I hope that's a little bit clearer.
I think so, yeah. Somebody else has asked, and Ruth, we may need you to share this again. The slide that you talked to showing the progress in terms of the representation of women at different levels, that slide that had the coloured lines on, somebody said that they can't quite understand it in terms of what the lines are representing, the paler lines. So I don't know, Ruth, if you can get that slide back up, perhaps you could just talk through that one again.
Yes. So as we're all scientists here, on the x-axis are job titles going from postdocs being at the starter end and professors at the top end. And if we take the simple idea that the more female professors we get, the better, then what I was showing here, so the y-axis is percent. And what I showed was from our first Athena Swan application in my institute that we put in, if you look at the paler outer lines, the paler blue was the male and the paler orange is the female. And then that green arrow by the professors shows how wide the disparity was. So approximately, let's say, 20% female, 8% male. Meanwhile, having got our silver award in the institute, we carried out our actions that we'd said we would do. We worked on this. And so when we put in our renewal application, which was successful, thank goodness, we then had a new set of data. And so that's labeled 2016, and with the blue arrow separating, shows that if you look at, again, if you line up with professors, you can see that as a proportion now, because this is out of 100%, the male professors, they constitute the group now, let's say 70%, and the females now are constituting, let's say, 30% of our total professoriate. So we have increased the number of females being promoted to chair in our department, and almost all of that change is due to promotion rather than recruitment, because at that high level, as you know, we don't have that many positions coming up. And so I hope that's a little bit clearer. We are reducing the gender gap throughout, actually, but particularly there at the chair or professor level. Is that better, Ruth? Or?
I think that, yes, Susan, I've had a response already on the question saying that they do understand it now, so thank you for explaining that.
Oh, thank you. I'm happy about that.
There are a lot more questions. I'm just going to pick up a few more. We can always come back to them at the end of the session if we've got time. Interesting one here. How have your male staff members responded to these initiatives? How have you kept them engaged and on board?
Okay, good question. So many males started off being in favour with this. As I say, there are a lot of good blokes out there. And of course, you know, the idea of who doesn't want to be fair, etc. There are then a chunk, I'd say, who are neutral, well, let them get on with it kind of thing. And I suppose there are some who feel threatened or come out with crass statements like, oh, you need to be female to get a chair now. I would say to that we carry on giving the message that this is a transparent process. What we've done is help everybody to understand it and everyone feel prepared and ready to apply. So again, it's pretty hard to argue against that. It's not that the criteria are lowered or altered for females. So, and at the end of the day, if there are one or two male, or indeed the odd female who are also thinking, oh, I don't like this, it's not right. Well, 'twas ever so. There will always be doubters and people whose glass is never full. Fine. As long as I carry 99% of people with me, I'm happy. You know what? Even if it's 90%, because to me, I have no doubt about the strengths of the arguments we can make, the strengths of the data we can bring to this, and also when we look at other examples like industry, increases in performance as well. So yeah, you have to be pragmatic, talk to people, communicate with people, at the end of the day, just shoot the ones. I mean, sorry, just forget about the ones who don't agree. Yep.
You mentioned diversity dividend figures, and I just wondered where that statistic came from. There was some references mentioned in previous slides, but I didn't see a reference to that. So that's a question for me, actually, Susan.
Okay, I'll find that and I'll send that to you. Yes, I mean, I don't have it at my fingertips, but yes, I think it's something called McKinsey.
Yeah, the McKinsey report. Yeah, I thought it might be, but just wanted to see if it was that you found. Yeah, okay. If you just check that, let me know. That'd be great, because that's the source I usually quote. There's an interesting question here based on your Vice Chancellor's kind of aspirations. So somebody's asking here, no fewer of 40% in university boards sounds very ambitious. How can your university protect the females so that they're not made to sit on disproportionately more meetings than a male counterpart?
Yeah, no, again, another good question. We don't want committee overload. So I suppose I would say, firstly, I am in favour of us all being good colleagues and saying yes to a range of things, but you don't have to say yes to everything. And perhaps if you do get the opportunity to sit on a high-ranking university board, then perhaps you have to look to say goodbye to something else that you've been serving on. People will understand that. My second answer, I guess, is a bit more glib, but you know, if you want something done, give the job to a busy person. Somehow, I think the things we really want to do, somehow we do make way for it, maybe because we do other things that only 80 to 90% of truly excellent and outstanding. You know, you can achieve an awful lot without being perfect. Perfect is the enemy of the good, is another saying to remember. So I guess it's adjusting what you do. Clearly, if you only have in your university one professor, and you need to be a professor to be on certain committees, then you have to ask yourself, why? Who says you need to be a professor to sit on Senate or something else? So again, rather like the workplace, look at the whatever you call it, the terms and conditions, the things that have been around since the year dot that say you have to be a professor, so that you can share the load and the experience more broadly. So I think there's all kinds of ways you can, and definitely we do have to protect ourselves from not being the face that is on all the committees until you collapse under the load of work, or your research goes, you know, right down to, you know, an unsustainable level. I hope that's a bit helpful, Ruth. I could say more, but I think I won't.
Thanks, Susan. And we have got some more questions, but I'm going to see, perhaps ask those at the very end if we have a bit of extra time, because obviously we want to hear from Alex as well, and I'm sure people will have questions for him too. So thank you so much for that, Susan, and we may come back to you at the end. But Alex, if we could move over now to what you've been doing at the University of Southampton, that would be great.
Okay, can you see and hear me?
Yes, I can. I'm going to put myself on mute now, though.
I assume that if you can hear me, then everybody else can. So, hello everyone. Thank you to WISE for inviting me to participate in this webinar. Very late notice. I just to introduce myself. So I'm Alex Meliwish. I'm the Equality Chartered Advisor at the University of Southampton. I quite liked Susan's question of why me, so I'm going to copy her and very quickly say why am I here. First of all, the reason that I'm presenting today and nobody else in the institution is mainly because of the late notice that we had. So I apologise that I'm not a senior professor in the institution presenting on this, but I have been involved in equality at the University of Southampton now for nearly 7 years. I've been involved in Athena Swan, well, for all of that time, but more directly since about 2012 when we did our renewal for bronze at that time. And since 2015, my role has been specifically on Athena Swan. So I've been the main driver of the university's submission, supporting the University Athena Swan Committee to progress the work there. And I've also been advising and guiding all of the departments who have put in submissions in that time as well. Personally, I'm an electronics graduate, just an undergraduate, I'm afraid, but and I'm also an Athena Swan panelist. I've chaired a few panels now, so I have the experience of having read lots of different Athena Swan submissions, and having been in that situation of knowing what you're looking for, that really helps with demonstrating the impact in your own submissions as well. I'd also just like to say thank you to Susan for her presentation, and congratulations to her in Liverpool for getting what sounds like a very well-earned silver award at an institutional level. We were awarded silver last year as an institution on the old criteria, so for her to achieve that on the new criteria is fantastic. I know that Imperial were awarded silver at the same time as we were, but on the new criteria, so it'll be interesting to see how we get on with the renewal, which will be on the new forms as well. Susan has really covered all of the issues that you need to be aware of, I think. So thank you to her. She set that up very well for me to actually cover the issues about what are the concerns for how we promote women in the organisation. So I'm not going to really cover those again. They weren't in my presentation anyway, but thankfully she's now covered those, so you should all now be up to speed on those. I'm going to focus more on what it is that Southampton has been doing to enhance those opportunities for women in the organisation. And I'm going to finish as well with some tips on what you can do as an individual, because I know that many of the WISE members who are watching the webinar today may well be individual members, and they may be in institutions that aren't as good at promoting these things. So hopefully some of those tips will be helpful, although Susan has already covered some of those points as well. So just in terms of an overview of what we're covering today, so I'll give you a very brief introduction to Southampton and what we're doing here. I want to talk about institutional responsibility, how we as an institution are demonstrating that we're taking this seriously and we understand our responsibility to making the changes necessary for women to be more readily promoted. And this isn't just about trying to change the women, if that makes sense. It's a very common thing that gets discussed. We understand that isn't what you're trying to do here. It's more about trying to understand if there's something in the processes that is wrong that means that we're not promoting women. So that's something I'm going to discuss here. And then I will do an overview of some of the specific initiatives that the institution has been put in place. And in fact, more specifically, I'm going to talk about some examples from our departmental submissions, because often they have the best impact. And they're also some of the more exciting initiatives that have been put forward. And I think they'll be quite useful to share. So I'm going to cover those, and then I'll do tips for individuals and also some of the notes for what we're doing in the future. So to look at Southampton, I'm going to brush past the first point because you can read those on the screen. I'm just going to cover the last 2 points verbally. So the University of Southampton is a founding signatory of the Athena Swan Charter back in 2005. We've had a bronze award as an institution since 2006, which was the first time you could get them. We've renewed several times, and then in 2016 we were awarded a silver institutional award. We have, I think it's currently 9 departmental awards. All of those are bronze, apart from 2 which are silver in chemistry and medicine. The Faculty of Medicine has about 1,000 staff, so I think they were particularly pleased to have achieved that recognition. Those were both a couple of years ago now, and in fact chemistry is going to have to renew their silver this year, and has an aspiration to go for gold at some point soon. Medicine is also hoping to go for gold. And in terms of our equality of credentials besides Athena Swan, we also have the HR Excellence in Research Award, which is related to the Concordat for the Development of Researchers, which many of you may be aware of if you're in higher education. This is a European Commission piece of work about promoting career development for research staff, particularly early career academics. We are a disability confident employer, which is, Susan talked about the 2-tick scheme. That has actually now been replaced by disability confident. It's the same principle though, of what she was talking about in terms of shortlisting. We're a mindful employer and we are a Stonewall diversity champion. So we are thinking about more than just gender. I thought I'd just cover those to let you know. But now we'll focus more on gender. So in terms of institutional responsibility, we've made some real progress in this in the last couple of years. So we've had a diversity champion since about 2001. But when our new President and Vice Chancellor started in 2015, he said, I want to do it. So that's Professor Sir Christopher Snowdon. He is now our ED&I champion. So he's the most senior member of the organisation who is making sure that we're thinking about diversity in all its forms whenever we can. And he's excellent. I couldn't fault him at all. He's really engaged. He knows what we're doing. And he knows what the issues are. He can really speak to those in the meetings that he's involved in. He's also supported by an ED&I lead who can be a bit more proactive in identifying issues and raising them with him. For us, that's Professor Navani Medici. And in terms of Athena Swan, our University Athena Swan committee is chaired by the Dean of Medicine, Professor Ian Cameron. He's been the chair for quite a few years now, and I hope he's going to continue for as long as he can. He was particularly keen to be chair, I think, because medicine was very keen to get it silver. He's also been a really good champion beyond the university, not just here. So in his tenure as the chair of the Medical Schools Council, he was quite keen to promote Athena Swan and gender equality for medical schools at that time. I mean, this also coincided with the time that Dame Sally Davis announced that she wanted all medical schools to have a silver award if they were going to apply for NIHR funding. So that was related to it, but we were quite keen to do it for the right reasons and not just for the funding purposes. We have a network of Athena Swan teams across the university. There's over 160 people who are now involved in Athena Swan in various different ways. All of our STEM departments are involved. They either have an award or are preparing an application for an award. We've started to get some of our art and humanities areas involved as well now. And our chair of council, who is female, is a member of the 30% Club. And so because of that, she has committed us to trying to achieve a minimum of 30% of women on all of our boards and committees at a senior level, but also she wants to go that step further, and she's committing us towards 30% female professors, and also looking at any other areas where we can make sure we have good gender representation. We have conducted some institutional projects to try and improve gender equality and, well, equality in general across the institution, which I'm going to cover in a bit more detail in the next slides. And we're also looking to provide as many opportunities as we can for personal development. Generally, we try and do this in an open basis. So we actually have very few female-specific development programs. It's more about making sure that women are having access to the development programs that are available, and that those development programs are addressing the issues that women need them to address if there are specific differences. So just moving on to our first initiative. So the one that I want to share with you first is our reward project. So this is something that we did as a university. Started off in 2010, I think, quite early days, and delivery is still ongoing, although we're pretty much there with academics. We're now moved on to professional services. So this was a comprehensive review of the entire career life cycle for academics. We had several working groups that were recruited people from across the institution, different representation of levels and types of academic role, as well as people in HR. Each of those working groups was chaired by an academic in the institution, and each working group is looking at one of the balance of contributions to an academic career, the academic titles that we use to recognise those roles, and the probation process, the appraisal process, the promotion process, and also the senior pay, what we call level 7. And so one of the key things that we went into that project looking at was how do we equalise the profile of education and research. As anybody from a research-intensive organisation may be aware, research gets talked about a lot. I think in some ways it may even be easier to demonstrate how you are contributing to research than you are to teaching. But we were very keen that when we wrote these new career pathway guidelines, that there should be equal recognition of educational contribution as well as research contribution. So to that end, we reviewed the pathways in general, but also on the balanced pathway. If you want to be on the balanced pathway, you have to be contributing at least 20% of your work to each of education and research, which means that you can't be that professor who just wants to do research all of the time. You have to demonstrate that you're doing something towards the educational side of the institution as well. Otherwise, you can't be on the balanced pathway. Something else that we brought in was an online appraisal system. So that was supported by compulsory training for appraisers to make sure that when they were conducting their appraisals, they were being done appropriately and that they covered everything they should do. And then that's backed up by an online appraisal system. So the form is now online through our HR portal, which means that we can audit if staff are actually completing those appraisals. There's also a rating system involved so that we can moderate the quality of those appraisals. And the training that we ran included some elements of unconscious bias, although it wasn't comprehensive unconscious bias training. And the other key thing was to make sure that staff were cascading their objectives from the top down. So one of the ways that we've achieved that is that there's an expectation that the most senior members of the organisation will have their appraisals first, set their objectives, and then they will consider what the objectives need to be from the next level down when they're conducting their appraisals and so on. One of the outputs of the project, by the way, was that image that you can see on the right-hand side, which is the pathways diagram. And that just sets out the titles that we award to academic staff at each level, depending on which pathway they're on. So the majority of our staff are on the balanced pathway, but we have some staff on the education and the research and the enterprise pathway. And when we were reviewing the promotion criteria and the process, one of the things we were quite keen to emphasise, when we've always had this principle, but we've now highlighted it more, is that promotion is open to anybody on the basis of merit. So that means that even if you are a level 4 researcher who's on a fixed term contract at level 4, as I was saying, right, a research fellow, you are entitled to be able to apply for promotion. You can apply for promotion. That generates a knock-on question afterwards about how does that get funded, but that will get resolved. The promotion process itself is not supposed to take any funding issues into account. So that's one of the things that we did there. In terms of the promotion application process, we have a specific question on the application form now where we encourage applicants to disclose any individual circumstances that may explain gaps or a slight shortfall in terms of the numbers that may be on their CV, for example, in a similar way to what the REF was trying to do in terms of reducing the outputs that had to be returned for part-time staff or people who had a period of leave. And we're very keen to express to the applicants that this is going to be considered only in a positive way, and it's very much that we're trying to find reasons to promote somebody, not reasons not to promote somebody. So I think that's had quite a positive impact as well. And in the last promotion round, we ran unconscious bias panels training with all of the panelists that were interviewing as part of the promotions process as well. Other things that we do to support promotion, there's now an explicit section in the appraisal about career aspirations, every appraiser should be asking the question of their staff, when are you going to apply for promotion and how are we going to get you there? I think in practice it may not have happened, and we're going to be reviewing the new appraisal process to see where we can fix some of those issues, but we've made significant progress there. At the start of the promotion round each year, we have an open meeting that's hosted by the PVC, who is responsible for promotions. He's the chair of the promotions committee, and that's to explain how the process works, how you should consider the criteria, any tips on what you should do when you're putting together your application, who you should speak to, a bit of myth busting as well, because that's very common, that people create their own myths about what the criteria do and don't say, or what they do and don't mean. To complement that, each of the faculties have CV and application workshops, so anybody who wants to apply can put together an application and get some specific coaching on that. And we also encourage people to find mentors and buddies to support them through that process. And everybody who successfully passes the first round of the promotion process, which is the sort of application sifting that's done on a paper basis, they are offered interview coaching, so that when they go to their interview stage, they are confident and know how best to present themselves at that interview. That's done by an external provider, and they have a gender balance of facilitators. So now I'm going to cover some of the more specific initiatives that we've got within St faculties. The first one I want to share with you is the New Frontier Fellows. This is an initiative that our Faculty of Engineering and the Environment put together. It is a 5-year research fellowship that gets offered in rounds. So the first round, I think, was in 2011, and we have just recruited for the second round in 2016, because the 2011 round would have completed. And the idea is that you are supported throughout that fellowship to conduct the research in the area that you want to do. So it's funded by the university for your own research, although it has to be related in some way to research the university is already doing in order for us to best support that research. And successful completion of it leads to the individuals involved actually go through the promotion process that we offer to determine if they've met the criteria to become a lecturer, and then they'll be on a permanent lecturer contract on the balanced pathway, so they can start contributing as any junior academic would do. So the key features of this fellowship that we offer is that we actually have a female senior academic that mentors all of these fellows throughout. In addition to that, they have regular meetings with their head of academic unit, so that's the department within the faculty within which they are doing their research. And there is also a discipline-specific mentor, and they have the option to change who that mentor is if they're not happy with their mentor as well. They have, in addition to those regular meetings, they've also got a 6 monthly performance and development reviews. So a common issue that's cited in terms of having appraisals with postdocs is the idea that they may not be here long enough. So we do that every 6 months so that they can review the objectives that they've been looking at, and if there are any specific development areas they need to address in the process of studying that fellowship, so that we can be really sure that they are going to progress at the end of it. All fellows are also required to complete our PCAP program. This is the Postgraduate Certificate of Academic Practice. If anybody doesn't know what that is, this is required in order to gain a Higher Education Academy Fellowship, which we require of all of our teaching academics in the institution. Basically, it teaches you best practice in terms of delivering teaching to students. As part of completing PCAP, it is a requirement that you're actually leading on a teaching program in the institution. Therefore, the people who are on this fellowship will actually get a lived experience of teaching, leading on their own module, also involved in supervising undergraduate projects. So they actually, although their main role in that time is to do their research, they are gaining the experience that they need to become a well-rounded, balanced academic by the end. They're also expected to contribute to leadership type roles, so leading on institutional projects or faculty projects that are for the benefit of the institution, which would mean being on committees, and so that, again, is contributing to that well-rounded aspect. In terms of the number of people we've had on those fellowships, I quickly looked up the application figures. So we advertise this as an open call through our jobs website. And since 2011, so between the 2011 programme and the programme that's just gone, we had over 1,700 applications, and 16% of those applications were from women. However, in terms of the ones that we've actually taken on, 21% of those people were women. So we've had 6 women actually go on to become fellows on these programs, 23 men. As a benchmark, nationally, around 18% of engineering faculty are female. So we are a bit ahead of that, and hopefully that will start to see that change in that faculty. Is there anything else that I wrote down here to share with you? I think that's the main thing. So what we've been really pleased with on that one is that actually all of the fellowships, all of the people who awarded those fellowships have now, from 2011, have now moved on to a permanent lecturer role, which is 2 women at this stage. In terms of, so the other initiative I want to talk to you about is this continuity of career scheme. These are quite common in institutions now. At the moment, we only have them in specific faculties. That's mainly to do with the way that our budgets are allocated within the university. But one of the things that we need to look at is how to make the availability of these schemes more consistent across the institution. The offer is slightly different depending on which faculty you're in. But as a principle, this is a ring-fenced budget within each faculty, which has been put aside to specifically fund people who take some kind of a career break, whether that's maternity leave or sick leave or some other long-term period which could affect their research record. And then they can use the money however they want in order to allow them to do more research time. So some of the examples that I've given there, you could use the money to fund childcare so you can attend conferences, you could buy back some time for teaching so that you can spend more time on research, or some people use it for research assistance so that, for example, while you're on maternity leave, you can employ a research assistant to maintain your research activity even though you're not actually working. It could be used to put in place bridging contracts, so that particularly affects postdoctoral researchers who may be on fixed-term funding, and if there's a gap between the 2 contracts, then the funding can cover that gap. And it could also fund access to development programs. So we've had quite a few people take these up, and we think the impact has been quite good. The next one I wanted to talk about is in our Faculty of Health Sciences. So they deliver teaching programs in nursing and midwifery, but also things like podiatry, occupational therapy, physiotherapy, and I'm probably going to forget anything else, but I think they cover some other things. It's effectively subjects that are allied to health, allied to medicine. That faculty is STEM. It's classed as being in the STEM remit of disciplines, but it is predominantly women, as you may appreciate, because it's mostly made up of people who have had experience of nursing and midwifery careers. So many of the people who have been employed in that faculty were taken on as experts in their field to deliver teaching as a sort of nursing training type role. But the faculty has been very keen to support those individuals to become research active so that they can have more people in a balanced pathway within their faculty, to make more opportunities available for them to progress in the organisation as well. So to that end, they've provided both financial and flexibility support, so in terms of reduced workload so that they can actually take the time to complete a PhD part-time, or in some cases they may take a break for that PhD, so that more of those staff have a postgraduate qualification, which would then allow them to be more research active and start publishing their research. So That started off back in 2010-11 with about 60 staff in the faculty that had a postgraduate research degree. It was 95 by 2014-15, and I have literally just this minute via email had the latest figures. There are now 128 members of staff who have PhDs or clinical doctorates, declins within that faculty. Aligned to that as well, there's been a cross-faculty mentoring scheme. Well, it's not really a mentoring scheme, but there's been an initiative to pair up people who are research-focused with people who are education-focused, so that the research-focused people can support the education-focused people to publish to generate research, to publish it, to generate income from the research portfolio. And then vice versa, the education experienced people can support the research-focused people to develop their teaching contributions, so they can start contributing to the undergraduate teaching programs, increasing their education contribution. And so the net result should be that the whole faculty becomes more balanced in terms of that. This also has the ultimate effect that as we are bringing more of those teaching type academics into the research arena, we are effectively boosting the number of women who are in STEM who are doing research through an alternative means rather than trying to bring them up from the bottom. So I think that's had a really good impact there. So in terms of supporting individuals, for anybody who doesn't have that institutional support behind them, the three key things I think that we should cover is networking and mentoring. If you don't have somebody who can help you through your career, then there is an element of you having to take responsibility for that, as well as expecting somebody else to do it for you. So, and unfortunately, it sometimes come down to who you know rather than what you know, in terms of finding those opportunities for progression. But also the experience of other people can be really valuable. So if you don't have a mentor, reach out to people. You know, have a look within your own institution, see if there are any senior people who you may be able to approach, but also WISE can help you with finding mentors across the industry as well. In terms of development programs, we have had great success with Springboard at Southampton. We've funded several programs of Springboard. We've also got we've got a facilitator in the university as well, who we are hoping to use in the future. And Springboard is quite good. It's interesting because it's a personal development program. It's not necessarily about career progression. It's more about reflecting on your own personal life, your work-life balance, your aspirations for life, and thinking about if where you are right now is really going to get you where you want to be, and thinking about those hard questions. So that does mean that in some cases the outcome of going to Springboard could be you decide to leave the research arena, but hopefully if you're in STEM you will still stay in STEM. It's just that you might find a job in industry rather than staying in academia. As it is though, we have found that a lot of the people who have completed Springboard have also within the institution gone on to achieve promotion. So we feel it's had really good impact from that point of view, as well as supporting individuals to find alternatives if it's not really for them. I also mentioned Aurora there because I have heard of the programme. I know that it's good. It's great to hear that Liverpool are offering it. It's not something that we offer as an institution at the moment, but we want to look into it. And I think the actual programme is open to anybody. It's through the Leadership Foundation. I'd have to check the criteria, but you know, if you want to go on it, then see if you can apply, even if your institution isn't doing anything about that. We also offer, we have some leadership circles in the university, and we have some specifically women's leadership circles in the university. So these are people who are already in leadership positions or people who aspire to be in leadership positions in the university who can support each other. So it's about bringing the blocker type questions to that group, and the rest of the group can ask questions to help them to resolve those blockers. I think it's quite similar to Action Learning in that respect, which is something else that we've used in the past and can also be quite helpful. Finally, as far as generic programs go, you know, if you haven't already, see what your institution is offering in terms of any development program. It may not be women specific, but that doesn't mean it's not going to be helpful. So make sure you're making the most of all those programs that are available, and apply to them, take part in them, take from them what you can, and maybe you could even feed back to the people who are running them if there's something that you'd think they would really benefit from to improve them. Make sure you do give them some feedback. The final point is that there is targeted research funding available. So, I mean, the big names are things like Marie Curie, the L'Oreal UNESCO, Dorothy Hodgkins, but they're not the only ones. So if you are looking to get back into research, for example, after you've left a research career for a while, it's worth looking around to see if you can find some of these returners schemes. Obviously, you should probably try looking at the Research Council for your discipline, or the Royal Society, or the whatever the Learned Academy is for your discipline, because they may well offer some funding that would support you to get back into research, or even to progress your career. It's always worth looking at it and see if you can apply for them. So I just want to have a quick look at the impact that we've seen as an institution. So this is a bit like the graph that Susan showed, but this is for Southampton. These first graphs are in STEM, and this is taken straight from our silver submission, which you can find on our website, by the way, if anybody wants to read it. So on the left-hand side shows the percentage of women and the number of men and women that we had in the academic career pathways for 2011-12, and on the right-hand side it shows it for 2015-16. This graph just shows the STEM disciplines within the institution. And you can see that we had some small changes at the kind of level 4 position. Essentially, we managed to maintain that minimum of 40% female academics at the kind of researcher postdoc level. But then at every level above that, we've seen an improvement. And particularly at level 7, which is our professor level, we've gone from 13% in 2011-12 to 18% in 15-16. So that's an increase of 5 percentage points, which we were quite pleased with. Just to put that in context, if Ruth can go to the next slide, then this shows all academics in the institution. I wanted to include this because Susan's slide, as far as I could tell, was all academics, not just STEM. So this is just to show you that we have actually seen a change across the whole institution. I think that's primarily been driven by STEM because that's where we focused a lot of our attention, and most of those changes have been through promotion. But all of the changes that we've put in place have been open to all academics in the institution, so it would have had an impact in arts and humanities, social sciences as well. So the figure that it was in 2015-16, we had about 23% of our professors were female, and this year I just had a look after the conclusion of our promotion round that's just gone, although level 7 promotions won't be effective until August, I think. We're now at 24% female professors. And I mean, in terms of the actual disciplines, that varies hugely. Within the sciences, which is the one I mentioned earlier about the Education Research Initiative, 83% of their professors are female, but then it's a female-dominated area. And then at the other end of the scale, the Faculty of Engineering and the Environment, which was the faculty that runs the New Frontier Fellows, 7% of their professors are female. But I think it's really promising that, you know, if we have 21% of those New Frontier Fellows are female, that's a huge difference. And with the support that we're providing to them, hopefully they will be our professors of the future. So, speaking of the future, these are just some notes about what we're going to be looking at as an institution going forward. So the key thing we're doing at the moment is supporting all of our departments to transition to the new criteria, the new application forms, because they all have to use it from now on. And we have 6 applications going in November, so we're going to be very busy. We are also extending our work to look at professional and support staff as well as academics. And that's particularly important for technical staff because many of those are still in a STEM discipline. They still need support and they want to progress in their careers. And actually one of the things that we looked at as part of the Reward project that I spoke about earlier, and that we're still looking at as we start to extend that to our professional support staff, is that actually people in the professional roles can look to transition into the academic career pathway if they want to progress further. So at the moment, our technical roles, you can only go as high as, it's either level 5 or level 6, I can't remember which it is right now. So if you want to go any further than that, then you'd have to move into either a management role or into an academic role. And so, I mean, especially with some of our technical staff in the institution are actually publishing their work around, particularly around methods of how you run experiments or specific measuring, monitoring techniques. Actually, it could be quite appropriate for them to move into an academic career pathway in order to progress rather than being in that technical pathway. We're really looking to improve our data collection in all ways that we can. Sorry, I'm just looking at the prompts there. So, I mean, we've got universal coverage in terms of data, although we're always looking at all the opportunities we can find to collect data. So, for example, who's attending our training programs and what they think of it. But we're also trying to make sure that people are completing the information in terms of their other protected characteristics, especially around race and disability. We still have quite high levels of either unknown or non-declaration for some of our staff, so we're looking at trying to improve that so that we can really roll out the intersectional elements of AthenaSwan. And finally, I've got some key actions here. We've just implemented a carers leave policy, and I've just noticed the time, so I'm going to try and rush through these. We want to review our maternity policy, share parental leave, and the processes around fixed term. I was particularly interested to hear what Susan said about not having any qualifying period for maternity leave in Liverpool, which sounds amazing. We have just implemented a new staff leaver survey so that we can find out the reasons why people are leaving and what they thought of the institution. And we also need to really look at embedding the work we're doing around Concordat for researchers. So that's all from me. Now I think we're on to questions.
Hi, Alex. Yes, and I'm sorry, we are almost out of time, so I'm just going to pick one question. You talked about the ring-fenced research funding, and did that cost you money, and was it difficult to get it established? How did you get the funding agreement to that?
So the issue that we have with that at the moment is that it's only certain faculties that offer that. Because they're the gatekeepers of the money, basically. Our funding is devolved to faculties. They make the decision about what they want to spend money on. But they've all been very keen to support those. So in terms of actually getting those established, it hasn't been that difficult. One of the faculties offers up to £20,000 per person applying. So it is quite a lot of money overall. But the thing that we need to look at as an institution now is actually how do we make it more consistent between those faculties. It may not necessarily be a case of making that funding central because we may not be able to offer that, but it might be encouraging each faculty to have a uniform process and having the same amount of money available so that it's an equal experience across the institution.
Thanks, Alex, and I'm afraid we are out of time now, so thank you both very much. Thank you, Susan and Alex, and Alex, thank you particularly for stepping in so at such short notice. We really appreciate you coming along and supporting us today and sharing all your experiences, both of you. As I mentioned earlier, the recording for this session and the slides will be posted on the WISE website under the members area, and so I'd just like to wish you all a good afternoon for what remains of it, and hopefully we'll see you at our next webinar. Thank you very much, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.